The bustling cafe was filled with the quiet hum of conversation, the clink of coffee cups, and the warmth of an early afternoon sun filtering through large windows. Alexander Turner, the CEO of one of the world's largest tech companies, sat at a corner table, absorbed in his thoughts. His jet-black hair, meticulously styled, and his sharp suit were a stark contrast to the casual, laid-back atmosphere of the cafe. He was used to being in control, surrounded by boardrooms and high-stakes meetings. But today, his mind wandered. The pressures of running a global empire were weighing heavily on him, and it felt as if the world was moving too fast. He was interrupted by the soft chime of the door as it swung open, and his eyes, almost instinctively, lifted to see who had entered. And then, time seemed to stop. Elena, his ex-wife, the woman he hadn't seen in years. She stood there for a moment, scanning the room. Her long auburn hair cascaded down her back, and her elegant black dress accentuated her graceful figure. The years had changed her, but the familiar warmth in her eyes remained unchanged. Elena was everything he remembered, beautiful, poised, and, to his surprise, unaffected by their long history. For a moment, both of them stood frozen, as if unsure how to proceed. The emotions that flooded Alexander were an overwhelming mix of nostalgia, guilt, and confusion. He hadn't expected to see her today, never in a million years. Yet here she was, as if fate had guided her to this exact spot. Elena! Alexander's voice was low, almost hesitant as he stood up, unable to hide the surprise in his tone. Her eyes softened. Alexander, it's been a long time. They exchanged an awkward but polite hug, a mere formality that couldn't erase the years of distance between them. Elena gestured toward the empty seat across from him. May I join you? He nodded, gesturing for her to sit, and the moment she did, the tension between them was palpable. They both knew the weight of the years they'd spent apart. Years of silence, bitterness, and unspoken regret. The divorce had been messy, filled with unresolved emotions, but seeing Elena again stirred something in him that he wasn't ready to confront. The waitress came over, and Alexander ordered coffee, though his mind was elsewhere. Elena's calm presence made him uneasy, as if she were a part of a past he couldn't escape. They sat in silence for a few moments, the air thick with the things neither of them dared to say. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice steady but full of a quiet strength. I didn't come here to relive the past, Alexander, she said, her gaze never leaving his. I came to tell you something important. His brow furrowed. What is it? She took a deep breath, her hands clasped in front of her on the table. You have 2 daughters, twin girls, and they're yours. Alexander felt as if the floor beneath him had just given way. His heart skipped a beat, his thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. What? He muttered, hardly able to process the words that had just left her mouth. Elena's eyes were filled with a mixture of sadness and strength as she continued. I didn't tell you when I found out. You were busy with your career, and we were already on the verge of falling apart. But they're yours, Alexander. Your daughters. The words hung in the air, each one heavier than the last. He stared at her, trying to comprehend the magnitude of her revelation. His mind raced, but he couldn't grasp what she was saying. How could he have children he never knew about? Why hadn't she told him? The pain of being left out of their lives, of missing out on so much, gnawed at him. Before he could speak, Elena added, They're 10 now, and I think it's time you met them. Alexander couldn't believe what he had just heard. His daughters, twins, 10 years old. His mind couldn't make sense of it. He had spent so many years working tirelessly to build his empire, always pushing forward, always looking to the future. But in all that time, he had never once stopped to think about the personal cost of his decisions. The words, you have 2 daughters, echoed in his head, a haunting reminder of everything he had missed. Elena watched him carefully, as if waiting for him to process the truth. The years of silence between them felt like a chasm that no amount of words could bridge. She had raised their daughters alone, fought through every obstacle, every challenge, and now, she was offering him a chance to be part of their lives. But it wasn't just about the girls. It was about the years of sacrifice she had made, the loneliness, the hurt that had built up inside her. "They're wonderful girls, Alexander," Elena continued, her voice softening. "They remind me so much of you. They have your eyes, your smile, but they've never known you. Not like they should have. And I've kept them safe from the world, from the pain that comes with a broken family. But it hasn't been easy. I never wanted them to feel abandoned, to feel the way I did when we ended things." Her words hit Alexander like a ton of bricks. He hadn't just been absent from their lives. He had abandoned them in the most painful way. He had always told himself that his work was his priority, that he was doing it for the future, for security. But he had forgotten about the present, the life that was unfolding without him, the life he was now learning about, bit by painful bit. "How are they?" he finally asked, his voice strained, a mixture of guilt and curiosity. "Are they okay?" Elena gave him a small, sad smile. "They're resilient. They're smart, kind-hearted. They've had to grow up quickly, but they've done so with so much grace. It's because of everything I've given them." His heart ached as she spoke, but there was more. He could see the deep, unspoken burden Elena carried. The secret she had held onto for so long was now laid bare before him, and he could see that it had taken everything out of her. "There's so much more you don't know, Alexander," Elena said, her voice trembling slightly. "I've been doing this alone for so long, and I didn't want to burden you. I thought you'd be angry, that you'd resent me for keeping this from you. But I can't keep hiding the truth anymore." Alexander felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, regret, disbelief. But most of all, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. These were his daughters, his flesh and blood, and he had to make things right. He couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. He stood up abruptly, his mind racing. "Where are they? I need to meet them. I need to see them." Elena's eyes softened. "They're in the car outside. They don't know we're here, but I'll bring them in." He nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He had so many questions, but the only thing that mattered now was seeing them, meeting his daughters for the first time. The world outside seemed to fade away as he waited for Elena to return with the girls. The future, for the first time in years, was filled with possibilities. The minutes felt like hours as Alexander sat at the table, his mind racing with thoughts of the twin girls. His daughters. The words still felt foreign, unreal. He stared at the empty chair across from him, imagining what they might look like, what they might think of him. How could he ever make up for the years he had lost? When Elena returned, her expression was calm, but there was an unmistakable warmth in her eyes. She walked slowly, her hands gently guiding the two girls who followed behind her. Alexander's heart skipped a beat as they approached the table. The first thing he noticed was their eyes, bright, green, and full of curiosity, just like his. They were standing close to each other, a mirror image of one another, as if they were a single entity split into two. One girl had her mother's auburn hair, the other's was a shade darker, but both shared the same radiant smiles. "This is Sophia," Elena said softly, nodding to the girl on the left, "and this is Olivia," gesturing to the girl on the right. Sophia, the bolder of the two, looked up at Alexander with a mix of shyness and curiosity, her eyes scanning his face as if trying to place him. Olivia, on the other hand, appeared more reserved, holding her mother's hand tightly as she hid behind her. Both girls had an air of quiet confidence that came from being raised by Elena, but there was an undeniable vulnerability in the way they looked at him. They didn't know him, not really, and that hurt more than Alexander could have imagined. Alexander stood up, his hands slightly trembling. "Hello, Sophia." "Hello, Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Sophia took a cautious step forward, her eyes narrowing in a mix of curiosity and caution. "Are you our dad?" she asked quietly, as if the question itself was still uncertain in her mind. Olivia peered up at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak, but her gaze softened just a little, as though she were trying to piece together the puzzle of who this man was. Elena smiled gently, kneeling down beside the girls. "Girls, this is your father, the man who we've been waiting for." The weight of Elena's words hit Alexander like a wave. They had been waiting for him, waiting for a father who, up until now, had been absent, distant, and unaware of the family that existed in his absence. His heart swelled with a combination of guilt and longing. How could he have missed out on this? On these precious moments? He felt the sting of regret, but he refused to let it stop him. He had to be present now. Slowly, he crouched down to their level, his voice soft. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here before. But I promise you, I'm here now, and I want to get to know you both." Sophia studied him for a moment, then looked at her mother. Elena nodded, her eyes filled with encouragement. After a beat of hesitation, Sophia extended her hand to him. It was small, delicate, but her grip was firm, almost as if she were testing him. Alexander took her hand, feeling an overwhelming sense of connection, as if this simple gesture was a bridge between them that he desperately needed. "Thank you, Sophia," he said softly, and the small girl's face brightened into a hesitant smile. Olivia, still quiet, looked up at him but didn't extend her hand. Instead, she simply nodded, her big brown eyes still filled with curiosity, but also a cautious wariness. Alexander understood. Trust wasn't something that could be earned in an instant, especially after all the years that had passed. He could see the wariness in her eyes, the silent questions about who he was, about what kind of father he would be. "Hi, Olivia," he said gently, offering a warm smile. "I'm really glad to meet you." The two girls remained close to Elena, their quiet but strong presence speaking volumes. Despite their initial hesitation, Alexander could see that there was potential, a seed of something new and beautiful that could grow between them. But it would take time, patience, and above all, love. As Elena stood up and placed a hand on each of their shoulders, Alexander's thoughts turned to the future. He was here now, and no matter how difficult or uncertain the road ahead might be, he was determined to prove to them that he would be the father they deserved. The meeting with Sophia and Olivia left Alexander reeling. The girls' faces, their hesitant smiles, their cautious glances, everything about the encounter had stirred emotions he had long buried under layers of success, ambition, and work. He had built an empire, but in doing so, he had lost sight of the most important thing in life, family. As he sat back down at the table, Elena remained standing beside the girls, watching them closely. Her calm demeanor didn't fool him. He could see the years of struggle, the pain she had carried all on her own. Alexander's heart ached as he thought about the responsibility she had shouldered without his help. He had been absent, physically and emotionally, and now, here he was, standing in front of the two children he had never known. His daughters. The guilt was overwhelming. Every word Elena had spoken, every gesture the girls had made, pierced through him like a blade. How had he been so blind? He had spent years building his company, climbing the corporate ladder, only to lose sight of what really mattered. "Elena," he said, his voice hoarse, "I don't even know where to begin. I don't know how I can make up for all of this. I've missed so much. They've missed so much." Elena looked at him, her expression soft but resolute. "You can't change the past, Alexander, but you can change the future. They deserve a father, even if that father wasn't there before." Her words hit him hard. He had never truly understood the sacrifices she had made, the battles she had fought alone. She had given so much for their daughters, and now, it was his turn to give. He had the chance to be a father, to be there for them, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. Trust wasn't something that could be built overnight. "I want to be a part of their lives," Alexander said, the sincerity in his voice unmistakable. "I know I have a long way to go, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Elena nodded, her eyes filled with quiet understanding. "It won't be easy. They've been through a lot, and so have I, but I believe we can find a way. For their sake, and for ours." He glanced at Sophia and Olivia, who were quietly listening, their gazes flickering between their parents. They didn't fully understand the weight of their conversation, but Alexander could see the beginnings of trust. The journey would be long, but he was willing to take it step by step. As the cafe around them hummed with its usual energy, Alexander felt a new determination rising within him. He wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. He would be the father they needed. He would make up for every lost moment. And slowly, he would rebuild the family they had once been. But as he glanced at Elena, he knew there was still much more to uncover. about the past, about the man who had caused the rift between them, and about the choices that had led them here. For now, though, the future was all that mattered. And it started with these two girls, his daughters, who had finally brought him home. After the brief meeting with his daughters, Alexander found himself unable to focus on anything but the deep emptiness he felt about the years he had missed. The bond that he hoped to form with Sophia and Olivia would take time, but he was committed to rebuilding it, no matter the cost. However, one question continued to plague his mind. Why had Elena kept his children from him for so long? Days passed, but Alexander couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to this story than Elena had let on. She had mentioned that she raised their daughters alone, but she hadn't gone into details about why he hadn't known about them. Every time he tried to ask her about it, she had been evasive, redirecting the conversation back to their present situation, their future. She wanted to move on, but Alexander needed to know the truth. He needed to understand why everything had turned out this way. One evening, after a long day at work, Alexander called Elena. His fingers drummed nervously on his desk as he waited for her to answer. The sound of her voice when she picked up felt like a lifeline. "Hello?" Elena's voice was warm, but there was a quiet hesitation. "Elena, we need to talk," Alexander said, his tone serious. "I can't keep pretending that everything's fine. I need to know the truth. Why didn't you tell me about the girls? Why did you keep them from me for so long?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Alexander could hear Elena's breath, soft but steady. "I was protecting you," she said quietly, "and I was protecting them." "Protecting me?" Alexander was taken aback. He had never thought of it that way. "From what?" Elena sighed. "There's someone else, Alexander. Someone who made sure you wouldn't know about them. It's not just that I kept the girls from you. I had no choice." His heart tightened. "What do you mean? Who?" The silence on the other end stretched. Then, Elena spoke, her voice low and cautious. "It's someone from your past, someone you're connected to through your business. A man who has ties to the company, and he made sure you couldn't know about the girls. He was powerful, and he had the means to make sure I stayed quiet." Alexander's blood ran cold. He had always known that the higher he climbed in the business world, the more power he would encounter. But to hear that someone had used that power to keep him from his own family? The betrayal hit him hard, like a slap to the face. "Who is he?" Alexander's voice was barely above a whisper. Elena's voice faltered. "His name is Victor Hayes. He's been a silent partner in your company for years, and he's been pulling strings behind the scenes. He's dangerous, Alexander. I don't know how much he's done to you, or how far his reach goes, but I couldn't risk it. I couldn't let him destroy our daughters' lives too." The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Alexander's mind raced as he tried to process everything. Victor Hayes. He knew the name, but he hadn't realized the extent of the man's influence. If what Elena was saying was true, it meant that his entire life had been manipulated, controlled in ways he couldn't have imagined. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Alexander asked, his voice tight with frustration. "I was trying to protect you," Elena replied, her voice tinged with regret. "But I realize now that keeping the truth from you wasn't the answer. I should have trusted you, but I was scared. I thought if I told you, it would only make things worse, that you wouldn't believe me." Alexander took a deep breath, the realization that so much of his life had been built on lies crashing down on him. His mind was spinning, but one thing was clear. He needed to confront Victor Hayes. He needed to expose him, to reclaim the life he had lost, and protect the family that was now his responsibility. "Where is he now?" Alexander asked, his voice filled with determination. "I don't know," Elena replied. "He's kept himself hidden, operating behind the scenes. But you're not the only one who's been affected by him. He's done things that go beyond just keeping you away from your daughters." That was all Alexander needed to hear. He couldn't let this man, Victor Hayes, destroy any more lives. He had already taken so much from him. Now, it was time to take it back. The next day, Alexander set out to find Victor Hayes. He wasn't sure what he would find, or if he would even be able to get close to him, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let Victor's manipulation continue. He had to take control of his life again. He met with his lawyers, gathered information on Hayes's whereabouts, and even spoke with some old business associates who might have insight into his operations. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Hayes had his hands in multiple industries, always operating in the shadows, never making his presence known in the public eye. He was a master at staying out of the spotlight, but Alexander was determined to find him. Finally, after weeks of searching, Alexander tracked Hayes down to a secluded mansion on the outskirts of the city. The house was imposing, surrounded by tall iron gates and thick hedges, making it almost impossible to approach unnoticed. But Alexander wasn't afraid of challenges. He had faced them his whole life. He arrived at the mansion late in the evening, under the cover of darkness. With the help of a few trusted associates, he managed to slip past the security and into the estate. The tension in the air was palpable as he approached the front door, his pulse quickening with every step. Victor Hayes was waiting for him. When the door opened, Hayes stood on the other side, tall and imposing, with an air of arrogance that seemed to fill the space. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face a mixture of surprise and calculation when he saw Alexander standing there. Well, if it isn't Alexander Turner," Hayes said, his voice smooth and full of smugness. "I didn't expect to see you here. What is it that brings you to my home?" Alexander's eyes narrowed as he stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with a dangerous edge. "I'm here to put an end to your manipulation. I know what you've done. I know what you've taken from me." Hayes's eyes flickered with something. Amusement, maybe, or irritation. He didn't seem intimidated. "And what exactly are you going to do about it, Alexander? You have no proof. You don't even know the half of what's been going on." "I don't need proof," Alexander replied coldly. "I know enough to destroy you, Victor. And I will, unless you come clean. You've used your influence to ruin my life, to keep me from my family. But that ends now." For a moment, there was silence between them. Victor Hayes studied Alexander, sizing him up, weighing his options. Finally, he smiled, a slow, predatory grin. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything from me?" Hayes sneered. "You're nothing. You have no idea what I've built. Then it's time you realize that I'm not going to let you take anything more from me," Alexander said, his voice steady. "This ends tonight." With that, the confrontation began. It wasn't just a battle for control of a company or power. It was a fight for the truth, for the family that Alexander had lost, and for everything that had been taken from him. He wasn't going to back down now. The tension in the room was suffocating. Alexander could feel every nerve in his body tense as he stared down Victor Hayes, who seemed unfazed by the confrontation. Alexander's mind raced, but his resolve was firm. There was no way he was walking away from this without answers and justice. He had already missed too much, lost so much, and now he had to make sure Hayes couldn't ruin anything else. Victor chuckled, a low, mocking sound that grated against Alexander's nerves. "You really think you can threaten me, Alexander? You've been gone for so long. I've already written you off as a non-issue. Your little empire doesn't matter anymore. You've been playing in the shadows, controlling everything behind the scenes. But you underestimated one thing." Alexander's voice was steady, his words sharp. "You underestimated me." Victor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't respond immediately. There was something calculating in the way he looked at Alexander, almost as if he were evaluating him, deciding whether or not to engage. "What do you want, Turner?" Victor finally asked, the arrogance in his tone replaced with a faint trace of concern. "Do you think you can just come in here and demand answers? You don't have a leg to stand on. You were out of the picture for years, and you've got nothing but questions." "I want my family," Alexander replied, his voice unwavering. "I want to know why you kept me from them, why you used your influence to hide the truth from me for so long." Victor leaned back, his smirk never leaving his face. "You think you can just waltz in here and take back what's yours? You should have thought about that before abandoning your wife and children." At those words, something inside Alexander snapped. The memories of his past, of Elena's pleading eyes, of the days he spent consumed by ambition, ignoring the most important things in his life, flooded him. He had been a fool, but he wasn't one anymore. He wasn't going to let this man dictate his life any longer. "I didn't abandon anyone," Alexander spat. I was manipulated, and so were they. But I'm here now, and I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done." Victor's smugness finally cracked, and he stood up from his chair, his tall frame looming over Alexander. The two men stood in a silent standoff, neither willing to back down. Finally, Victor let out a sigh, as if resigning himself to the inevitable. "You really want to know the truth?" Victor said, his tone shifting slightly, though still laced with disdain. "Fine. The truth is that I didn't want you to know about your daughters. They were a threat to my position, Alexander. A threat to everything I've worked for." Alexander's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, a threat?" Victor paused for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. Then he spoke, his voice dark. "Elena was more than just your wife. She was a key part of my plans, part of my empire. She helped me control parts of your business, but I couldn't let her have her own agenda. If you had known about the children, they would have taken priority, and I couldn't risk that." "So, you used them," Alexander said, his voice thick with disbelief. "You manipulated her and me to keep your control over everything. You never cared about my family. You only cared about power." Victor's expression darkened, the mask of arrogance slipping for a brief moment. "Yes," he admitted, his voice low, "and I would have done anything to make sure nothing disrupted my plans. Your daughters were a liability. They still are." Alexander's blood boiled at the coldness in Victor's words. The realization of the extent of this man's manipulation, the lengths he had gone to, the lives he had destroyed, was overwhelming. He had to make it stop. "You're done," Alexander said, his voice resolute. "You'll never have that kind of control again." For a moment, there was silence. Then, Victor let out a dry laugh, as if the weight of the situation had finally caught up to him. "You think you can just tear everything down with a snap of your fingers? You have no idea how deep this goes." "I don't need to know everything," Alexander replied. "I just need to make sure it ends here." With that, the confrontation reached its breaking point. Victor's defenses had finally cracked, and he was no longer the untouchable puppet master he had once been. Alexander had him on the ropes, but the battle was far from over. The fight for his family, his legacy, and his future was just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur. Alexander's confrontation with Victor Hayes had been only the beginning. As the layers of deception were peeled back, the truth about the full extent of Hayes's control over his life and business began to surface. It was worse than he had imagined. Victor had been manipulating not only Alexander's company but his personal life as well, keeping him isolated from the very people who mattered most. Elena had been right to keep her distance from Victor all these years, but she had also been trapped by the same man. For the first time in years, Alexander understood the gravity of the situation. He had to rebuild his life, not just his business, but his family. He immediately called for an emergency board meeting to address Victor's involvement in the company. Alexander had already begun the process of taking back control, eliminating Hayes's influence from every angle. The revelations about Victor's underhanded tactics were enough to send shockwaves through the entire company. Alexander wasn't just reclaiming his life. He was reclaiming his future, and he wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Victor Hayes, stand in his way. But even with the business empire shifting, Alexander knew that the Real challenge was the emotional fallout. He had been absent for so long, and while Sophia and Olivia were beginning to warm up to him, their trust was not something that could be easily restored. He had to prove to them that he was here for the long haul. The hardest part was facing Elena. The tension between them was palpable. Alexander knew that he had a lot of work to do to rebuild their relationship, not just as co-parents, but as two people who had shared a history filled with pain, regret, and unspoken words. He reached out to Elena, asking to meet. It was time to have a conversation they had both been avoiding. A conversation about forgiveness, about healing, and about the future. When they sat down together, the weight of their shared past hung heavily between them. Elena was quiet, her eyes downcast as she waited for Alexander to speak. "I don't know how to fix all of this," Alexander began, his voice raw, "but I'm here, and I want to make it right, not just for me, but for you, for the girls." Elena looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and wariness. You can't undo the past, Alexander. You can't erase the pain. But I believe in second chances. If you're really here to stay, if you're really going to be a father to them, then maybe, just maybe, we can start over. Alexander nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. Trust would take time, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. He had lost so much, but now, he was determined to fight for everything that truly mattered. And with that, the journey to rebuild his family, his future, truly began. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander found himself slowly, painstakingly, regaining the trust he had lost, not only from Elena but from his daughters, Sophia and Olivia. Every small moment counted now. Every conversation, every shared laugh, every apology. His focus had always been on building his empire, accumulating wealth, and maintaining control. Now, he understood that the real legacy he had to build wasn't in his business, but in the hearts of the people he loved. It wasn't easy. The scars from the past, his absence, the lies, the pain, were not easily erased. But Alexander wasn't giving up. He had made a vow to himself and to his daughters that he would be present, that he would fight for the family he had lost, no matter what it took. He took time to reconnect with Sophia and Olivia. It started with the small things, reading bedtime stories, attending their school events, and simply being there for them when they needed him. Slowly, they began to open up to him, their guarded expressions softening over time. It wasn't just about proving his love through grand gestures, but through consistency and patience. Alexander had missed their childhoods, but he wasn't going to let the present slip away. Elena watched it all from the sidelines, her heart torn between old wounds and a glimmer of hope for a future she never thought was possible. She had been the one to raise their daughters on her own, and though it hadn't been easy, she had built a life for them. But seeing Alexander step up, seeing him take responsibility for his actions, was something she hadn't expected. It made her wonder if they could ever rebuild what they once had, or if they had already passed the point of no return. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Elena sat down with Alexander in the living room. There was a quiet weight to the room, as if both of them knew this conversation was long overdue. "I never thought this day would come," Elena said, her voice soft, as she looked up at him. "I never thought you'd be here, not just as their father, but as someone who wants to make things right." Alexander's gaze softened, his voice full of sincerity. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Elena, and I can't change what I've done, but I'm here now. I want to build a future with you, whatever that looks like. I'm ready to do the work, for all of us." Elena took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over her. "I've waited so long for this, but I'm still scared. Scared that you'll leave again. Scared that it'll all fall apart once more." "I can't promise that it will be easy," Alexander replied, his tone earnest. "But I promise you this, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to let fear dictate our future." For the first time in years, Elena felt a spark of hope. It wasn't a promise of perfection, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, they could begin again. As the weeks passed, the family dynamic shifted. Alexander and Elena found a new rhythm, one that was rooted in collaboration and understanding. They worked together to co-parent, and their bond grew stronger in ways they hadn't expected. There were still difficult conversations, moments of vulnerability, and times when the past threatened to resurface. But they faced it together, united in a way they hadn't been for so long. Sophia and Olivia, too, found a new sense of security. They saw their parents working as a team, and though it wasn't the fairy tale reunion they might have imagined, it was real. And real was better than anything they could have dreamed. Months passed, and the family continued to heal. Alexander's company, now free from Victor Hayes's grip, was thriving again. He had taken back control, but it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about balance. It was about ensuring that the family he had once neglected would never again feel the weight of his absence. The girls had blossomed under his care, and though their trust in him was still growing, they no longer looked at him with the same wariness they once had. Sophia was becoming a confident young woman, full of curiosity and ambition, while Olivia's playful nature began to shine through more and more each day. They had both inherited their mother's strength and Alexander couldn't help but marvel at how much they had grown. One afternoon, Alexander decided to take a break from his usual work routine. He wanted to do something special for the girls, something that would show them that he was committed to being present in their lives. He took them to the park, a simple outing, but one filled with laughter and joy. He pushed them on the swings, ran races with them, and shared stories of his own childhood, stories he had never shared before. As they sat on a bench afterward, watching the sun begin to set, Alexander turned to Elena, who had joined them on the outing. "I know I can't undo the past," he said, his voice full of emotion, "but I want to be a part of their future. I want to show them that I'm here for good. And I want to be here for you, too." Elena looked at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "You've already shown me that you're here," she replied quietly. "And for the first time in a long time, I believe you." It was a moment of quiet contentment, a moment where Alexander felt truly present with his family, with the people who had once been lost to him. He had fought for his future, for the future of his daughters, and for the woman who had been his partner. They had all been through so much, but they had come out stronger on the other side. As they drove home that evening, the girls laughing in the back seat, Elena by his side, Alexander realized that this was the life he had always wanted, the life he had almost lost. And now that he had it back, he would never take it for granted again. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Alexander felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be, right where his family was. And with that, he knew that the future held nothing but possibility, and that together, they could face anything that came their way. They had come full circle, and this time, there would be no turning back. As the years passed, the Turner family continued to grow stronger, bound together by the love, patience, and resilience that had brought them through the storm. Alexander's journey had been one of redemption, not just in business, but in life. He had learned that the true measure of success wasn't in power or wealth, but in the relationships he built, especially with the people he loved most. Elena had once feared that forgiveness would be a distant dream, but as time wore on, she saw the depth of Alexander's commitment. They weren't perfect, but they had found a way to be a family again, one that was grounded in understanding, respect, and mutual support. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined them. Instead, it was their ability to move forward, together, that shaped their future. Sophia and Olivia grew into young women who knew the value of love, honesty, and strength. They had witnessed their parents' journey of growth and healing, and it had shaped them into compassionate, grounded individuals. They would carry those lessons with them throughout their lives. As for Alexander, he knew that no matter where life would take them, he had found his place. He was no longer the ambitious CEO consumed by the need for control and success. He was a father, a partner, a man who understood the importance of family, and that the greatest legacy he could leave was not in his business, but in the love he shared with those closest to him. And so, as the Turner family stood together on the threshold of a new chapter, there was no uncertainty in their hearts. The future, though unknown, was full of promise, because they had already fought for it. They had built something lasting, a foundation of trust, love, and forgiveness that would carry them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Their story was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like they were truly starting anew, together. The dawn of a new day had arrived, and with it, the knowledge that anything was possible, as long as they faced it as one. And in that moment, Alexander knew, without a doubt, that this was the life he had always wanted, the life he would never take for granted again. We want to extend our deepest thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. From the twists and turns of Alexander's redemption story to the moments of heartfelt reconnection with his family, we hope this tale has touched you as much as it's touched us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who might find inspiration in it. Your support means the world to us, and we're so grateful to have you as part of this journey. Stay tuned for more stories and videos. There's much more to come, and we can't wait to share them with you. Thank you again for watching and being part of this adventure. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of second chances.